Okay, today's Sunday and it's Ches Tevis. And as we always do Sunday, second hour, we are learning the Sefer Hayom Yom. Learning Hayom Yom. And we're holding the entry of Daled Ader Aleph. In other words, the third entry on page Chav Hey. I had a plan of going more deeply into Avos Yisrael, but Hashem had other plans. We went on. What we learned last week was a very interesting discussion. The Rebbe goes into what's called Sichliim Iyunim. Seichel Iyuni, Sichliim Iyunim. I suppose you could call that in general real reason, real intellect, real thinking, real rationalization. But it's called, in some circles, it's called Acharei HaTeva, or Seichel Ruchni and Seichel Eliki. Acharei HaTeva is the Hebrew for metaphysics. You hear the phrase metaphysics? You say metaphysics, people think, wow, he's a smart guy. He said metaphysics. Metaphysics means things that are not physical. And, of course, this is the discussion we had last week. I'm not repeating all of last week's discussion, because then that would mean that next week I have to teach you what I'm supposed to teach you today, which would be kind of foolish. But metaphysics means there is a real question. A real question. The question is, when I study the world and everything in it, to the best of my abilities, can that give me a sense of what is beyond, what is past the physical universe? By studying what I can see and hear, smell, taste, touch, and I indirectly identify, deduce. Can I know what's beyond? It's a very, very serious question. And of course the question really comes down to, if I look at my universe, I look at my world, and based on what I see, I make certain deductions, come to certain conclusions about what I cannot see, can I say with certitude that my deductions are true? Or is it just a whim? My feeling, my opinion. Yeah, right? Is it a whim? To use a word that really belongs in this discussion, it's a superstition. It's a hang-up. My mishigas. Of course, if you say that by studying the physical universe and everything in it, including life and all of the complexities and order of life, you wish to extrapolate, to go backwards to things that you cannot see, is nonsense. It's shtus. Then there's no point in pursuing abstract reasoning. And I discussed with you last week, this is the shita of the modern chachamim. The Anshe Mad of today's what's so-called scientists, or at least the so-called philosophy of science, this is the position. Position is that anything which you cannot see directly using physical measurement, or you cannot observe indirectly using physical measurements like mathematics, is nonsense. It's a waste of time. There is a whole field called philosophy, but philosophy is studied in university, not because anybody takes it seriously. It's still Baba Mises, but it's interesting Baba Mises, okay? But Lahav Levav Yavdalis, Torah disagrees. Torah says that that's not true. Torah says you could look at the physical universe, and using seichel, using reason, you can know from what you observe and how you interpret what you observe, what you cannot know and you cannot see, and what you understand is true. It's real seichel. It's real intellect. Now, of course, the big question becomes, how do you prove that something is true? The simplest way you prove something is true is you make an experiment. But you can only make an experiment with physical things. You can't experiment with ideas. You can experiment with machines. So how do people experiment with ideas? The real answer to that question, the true answer to that question, is they argue. They argue. It's called debate. In the world of abstract reasoning, the world of theoretical learning, debate is a very, very important part of the model, based on the belief that if what I'm saying is true, I'll win the argument. Now, that's not entirely true. There are things that simply cannot be argued. They can't be argued not because they're false, but because you have to almost feel them. But when I say the word feel them, I don't mean feel them emotionally, because feeling them emotionally is exactly what people are claiming. You're making up things based on your emotions or your instincts. Feel them, I mean that there's such a thing called a hergish sichli, a nocha sichlis, der lake von seichel. I can't explain it, I can't argue it. My mind is disposed to this and I sense that this is real. Sometimes, not only can you not prove things through experimentation, you cannot even be mizvakech, I can't debate them. Which leads us to the fundamental point of last week's class. But before I do last week's class, let me repeat what I just said. Do you mind moving down a little? Rebbe Schneerson, if you'd be male, I'd say you're a gentleman and a scholar. I don't know how to say it in womanese. A gentlewoman and a scholarette, a scholar. Female for scholar, a scholar. A dank. Which leads us to the point we made last week. And it's a very, very important point. And that is, there is a core difference in attitude towards chokhmah in the modern world versus the attitude towards chokhmah in the ancient world. And I mean specifically Teda. And the core difference is that in the modern world there is an assumption that says one's personal life has no bearing on one's intellect. How you behave, whether you're a nice person, or you're a mean person, or you're a kind person, or you're a cruel person, or a moral person, or an immoral person, has no bearing on your mind. Because of the disconnect between the brain and the person. This is the modern belief. There's no corollary between your intellect and your most. You could be a chaya, you could be in your personal life an animal. You do with the word from Aristotle. It's the benichnit aristoy. Now I'm not Aristotle, so I can be a pig. There's no corollary between the personal life of the person and their intellect. Why? Because in the modern world, we've inhibited the definition of intellect. We've narrowed it down to being only things you can prove using machines. Chassidus would argue that anything you prove using machines is b'chlal not seichel. It's seichel techni, it's not real abstract reasoning, it's simply technical reason. But this is what's been happened in the last 300 years. There's been a tkufa of enlightenment, renaissance and enlightenment, and the creation of the great universities, or at least the expansion, the opening up of the universe. All of the houses of learning were houses of pritzos. They were houses of godliness and decadence and morality, not today. 300 years ago. The source of all the throwing off of shame and Yiras Hashem, it all started in the houses of learning. On principle, on a shita. What's the shita? We don't believe in God. Why should we be inhibited? There's no connection whatsoever between how I live my personal life and the credibility of my seichel. In other words, I could be in my chaya pratim mamish an animal, and if I'm a smart person, I can mechadish chedushim amitiyim. The foundation of this is the limiting the definition of what reason is. If reason is mathematics and astronomy and physics and chemistry, then that's true. It's true. Why is it true? Because you're reasoning about physical things. It's not ideas, b'toharosam, ideas in purity, ideas by themselves. But in the ancient world, in Lahavdil, Elaf Avavdos in Teda, there is something called Acharei HaTeva. There's something called Seichel HaYunit, the idea of learning about things you cannot see, and which are very, very difficult to prove. And in some cases cannot even be debated. They're so fine, they're so edel, they're so ruchnius. When it comes to such matters, it's taught to us as a principle, a fundamental principle, personal integrity is everything. If a person is a pig, his brain doesn't work. I mean, it doesn't seichel. That's neshama. There's a mime from the Rebbe. Hitzitz, the Lashon is not nigla. Hitzitz. So the Rebbe says Hitzitz goes on the nitzitz beiri, which is misyachet nitzitz nivre. That's not an allusion to Avram's chokhmah. That's an allusion to Avram's neshama.
But the chokhmah kind of wasn't satisfied until.
But that was a matan from the Rebbe. Avram Avinu was a chokhmah chukam before he became a yid. Before he got this Hitzitz alav ba'alabira. Mitat chokhmah alone, Lahavdil Aristotle was a goy. Paltain was a goy. Eve was a goy. Yisrei was a goy. They didn't understand how a plant grows. They couldn't explain to you electrons. But when it came to Acharei HaTeva, came to Ruchnias, they were go'oinim. But their genius was predicated on their personal integrity. If in their private lives they did not live like Ader people, it offset their ability to reason. Because the real truth is that you cannot departmentalize even a mind. Forget about a heart. The human mind is part of the human being. If the human being is compromised, if the human being is biased, if the human being has predispositions or preconceptions, it takes away their ability to rationalize, to reason fundamentally, objectively, with integrity. So the first point is you must understand that al-pitera, the realm of Chokhmah, is very, very different, the realm of reason, of rationalization, of learning, than it is understood in the modern world. Because in Torah, Chokhmah actually begins where the physical world ends. And therefore, real Chokhmah, since you're dealing with things you cannot see, you can't even begin to approach real Chokhmah unless you have what's called in the Sfarim many hakdomis, prerequisites, requirements from before. You have all kinds of prerequisites that create the possibility of you to be a Chokhmah. I mentioned last week, and I don't want to get myself into any trouble, but Rambam writes you have to have a certain idea, Chokhmah Sateva, Chokhmah Sarfuah, Chokhmah Nefesh. Before you can learn abstract reasoning, you have to have at least a basic foundation of understanding the sciences and mathematics and so forth and so on, because the chiyuv brings to the shlila, the more solid your foundation of understanding what you could know, the more credible your extrapolation, you're going backwards towards the unknown is. But most importantly, your muhus, your personal integrity is of utmost importance. Which is why the Greeks, who were kaifrim be'ikah, they were real apokurs. They knew what they were being kaifir against. Preached preachers. Any person that wants to be a philosopher has to be a parush, removed. A person who lives a regular life and eats regular food and sleeps in a regular bed and permits himself all kinds of indulgences, it fogs the clarity of the mind. If a person wants to be a true intellectual, he has to live a simple life and eat rice and beans and live in a mountain and wear white robes and so forth. I didn't mention the incense. Now, but then it was Nizgala Kloinam. Says my mother Hasidus. They've been exposed to be hypocrites. The Greeks postulated, they argued that to study Acharei HaTeva, to study metaphysics. And metaphysics doesn't mean God, it means spirituality. And Chokhmah Lekis is considered a higher madrege, what we call in Teda Sprach, Ma'aseh Bereishis and Ma'aseh Merkava. Ma'aseh Bereishis is the lower level, Ma'aseh Merkava is the higher level. This is called Seichel Acharei HaTeva and Seichel Eliki. They preached Perishus. And they came to what conclusions? That there is a powerless God, a disconnected God. So Mother Hasidus say it's been exposed that they did not have the integrity they claimed you need. That in fact Aristotle was an animal in his personal life. And like I told you last week, the Ma'aseh mit the Rambam, that the Rambam met a person who was a Kaifa B'Yikir, and the Rambam argued to him whether it's intellectually imperative to have a God. The Rambam said, without God you can't be a true intellectual. Intellect, not a muneh. The Rambam said without reason, without God you can be intellectual. And this guy said no. And the Rambam said to him, if you do not bring God into your reason, you will become a Baal Taiva. V'chein hoya. And that's what happened. He fell into Taivas. Their whole idea was that intellect must be removed from being a pleasure seeker, a hedonist, on any level. And it turned out they were all hedonists. In other words, by their own argument, they defeated their own credibility. A person who's a Baal Taiva cannot have an opinion about Hashem because we assume that the Taiva precludes the possibility of having integrity. They turned out to be pigs, the worst kind of Baal Taiva. There was no uskafi in their life, and consequently, by their own definitions, they've discredited their own reason. As opposed to the great Rambam, under the Rabbeim, the Tzemach Tzedek, and so forth, that they had takaprishus. And therefore they learned the same Chokhmah and came to the conclusion that not only there's a God, but there's Mashgiach, Bashgacha Pratis, and there's Eizas Meifsim Shabbatera, and there's miracles, and there's Gil Yalakus, and there's Gil Dvaravadiyavadavanaviyim, and so forth and so on. So you see, the point of this Hayom Yom is to say that real seichel is called seichel iyuni. Real reason, real intellect is the intellect that analyzes things that you can only understand and feel intellectually and you cannot touch. They're not tangible, not sufficiently real, material. And in order to be engaged in what's called seichel iyuni, you have to be a potter. You can't be a person who allows themselves a material life. You have to be removed from the physical world, because if you aren't, it discredits your intellect. This is a review of last week's class. I think it was a pretty good review. This is a review of last week's class. Anybody make any comments? It's been game weiter. Okay? Or Daled or Aleph. So we're going to read it one more time. Reishis ha'achana. The first aspect of preparedness, to engage in intellect, which is called iyun. Iyun means analysis, not experimentation, but intellectual analysis, because you're dealing with theoretical things, with ruchniistic things, and their personal integrity is everything. And frankly, it's true even of the physical sciences. It's true of the physical sciences also. There's so much misinformation, it's incredible. You know, in the name of science, people make all kinds of statements that they don't believe themselves. I knew a guy who learned in Stanford University, one of the biggest, it's an Ivy League school, the biggest universities in America, and they would call up and ask what is Stanford's opinion on whatever it was. And he said it was such a joke. It was like you called up the 770 payphone, and now 770 payphone, what do you think? Shadav with $1 million baricha. So which Yoko picked up the phone? Which chacham? He gave you an answer basically because he has the after sign. There was no integrity, and then it goes in the paper. Stanford University. He said he was there. He witnessed this every day. People make phone calls. They didn't even speak to the professors. Whoever was in the office just said whatever he wanted and hung up the phone. There's so much misinformation because MS matters less than having your name in the paper. And when MS matters less than having your name in the paper, the problem is not with science. The problem is with the ists. The ists is the problem. Chochmah is emes. There's no contradiction between science and Torah. People. And when you have a philosophy that says that a human being in his personal life could live however he wishes, and you just sanction it, you give it a holy label, lifestyle, nocha lifestyle, nocha lifestyle, nocha lifestyle, without kosher, and it has nothing to do with the intellect. So Aristotle said that that's wrong. You can't live a different lifestyle. There's a way the Eibishter made people. If you live like a chaya, if you live like an animal, not you're an animal, you can't reason. So therefore, the beginning of any effort at engaging in true abstract reasoning, which Alpiteta is the only embassy for Chochmah, and specifically in Seichel it deals with Alakus, with the Eibishter. These are two levels. One is dealing with the theoretical realms, spiritual realms. And the second one is dealing with the Eibishter himself, with God. How can I explain this to you? I mean, in Chassidus it's not a question, right? In Chassidus it's Alakus and Alakah, godliness and God, Eid and Atzmus and so forth. But to use more philosophical form, the difference between Seichel Iyuni and Seichel Alaki, Seichel Iyuni deals with the concept of life and the concept of the soul. You look at the physical universe, look at organic things, lebedik ezach. The Goyim understood that there has to be a nefesh, that there's a soul. And they debated this soul philosophically and came to such conclusions as the soul lives forever. These are profound intellectual contributions to the body of knowledge. They really believed this. I mean, but I mean it taki in Chakira. I don't even mean it in Kabbalah and Chassidus. Poshet and Seichel and Nushi, they understood the concept of souls, they understood the concept of angels. But you must understand, philosophers didn't have a concept of angels like 10-headed beasts or 40-eyed characters or 7 arms, this kind of nonsense, shtusim. Their concept of an angel was a malach, was a life, but not of a person, but of a larger entity. According to this model, to the classic model, every star and every planet and every galaxy has a nefesh, has a neshama. And they call these neshamas malachim. or mazalis, the constellations. But that was their concept of angels. Angels are a force that gives life to physical things. And then, of course, they would extrapolate backwards. If there is life in a body, in a human body, in Lahavdla, the bodies of the heavens, is there a concept of life without an association with a body? And the philosophers came to the conclusions that there is a notion of a soul. When there's no longer bodies, the soul lives on. Al ha-nefesh shehu nitzchi. The Rabbi Sadia Gaon, the Sefer Gadlunas V'Deis, he has 10 chapters. One of the 10 chapters is called Al ha-nefesh shehu nitzchi, that the soul is eternal. And he has no such thing as a nefesh kiss. In philosophy, nefesh kiss is a chassidus. But they understood that life is fundamentally forever. Or to use a philosophical argument, it's not life that is new. It's death that is new. The chiddush is that something could die. Something could die means that even while it's alive, it's not truly alive. Because life, by definition, is something which never changes. These are extrapolatory conclusions that Chachamim reached. Lahadl Goyim came to these conclusions with Seichel Anushi, their own understanding. So this is called Seichel Alaki, is talking about Bayrei Ha'olam, the creator mamish. Not the life of the world, but the source of all life. And of course, this is where the issues come in. And as I told you so many times, the key issue which defines Yiddishkeit is the issue of Yesh Mayayin. That David should create the world out of nothing. The world once did not exist at all. So you have Seichel Yuni, which deals with Ruchnias, like Neshamas and Malachim. And again, you have to understand that Malachim, it's not a superstitious notion of angels. It's a very philosophical one. And then you have Seichel Alaki. Seichel Alaki means to understand creation. And the idea that there was once not a creation, Malafanim, Mala'acher, Mala'maylo, Mala'mata, and so forth. So I read again, Reishis Ha'achonim, the first step in preparedness. Le'isaskas b'sichel b'yudim, in engaging in abstract reason, u'b'seichel alaki, and especially reason that deals with the Creator Himself, b'frat, who? What are the requirements? The requirements are an idealization of self. I want to put that word into the next dictionary, idealization. Idolize, idealization. Maybe let us put idol in also, yeah, because refined doesn't cut it. Epicenish does. Aleph, who? Yigias basar. You have to toil with the flesh. Lahasar atuvtam yon elam. You have to remove your geshmak and gashmis. It's an incredible thing to contemplate. But welches meint zu dem atuvtam in yom hazeh? It's a madregen. There was more getayt. Bas tchila simen yafal labonim. If you have Yiras Hashem, then you'll have Avas Hashem later. Bas tchila. Anyway, the first step, we would call this Yigias Basar Lahasar Atuf Tam. Elam is called this kafia. But it's an incredible thing. I'm saying you cannot enjoy physical things and be a real intellectual. It's such an interesting idea. I mean, when we look in the mirror, it doesn't look so pretty. I don't mean the gashmis, I mean the ruchnis. You have to lose your geshmak. You have to not enjoy physical things. There are such people, by the way, B'teva, you should know. There are people that were naturally that way. They're weirdos, they're geeks. There's a website, by the way, it's called geeks.com. Geeks.com. Geeks means yukos, funny people. Who, when they walk in the street, they're looking up at the stars, they bang into the pole and say, excuse me. Because... Some usually it goes together. Not always, but usually sometimes it goes together. Anyway, you have. The Rebbe said, the Fidik says, you have to remove yourself from Taivas Gashmiyim. Not you shouldn't give yourself the Taivas Gashmiyim. You shouldn't even enjoy them. I've told you the story a dozen times that they brought that Rebbe a new car. I just saw the film. The Rebbe stood in front of 770 10 minutes. The Rebbe was on his way to the Oyel. So they bought him a new car. They were standing on the curb with the car. And you hear on the video the Rebbe saying, Seini Matanas Yichye. The Rebbe waits 10 minutes on the sidewalk till they take away the new car and bring him the old car. And the Rebbe goes to the old car. Shabbos, by Fabrengen, the Rebbe spoke about it. And the Rebbe said, it's not the pshat that I'm doing, it's kafir. He said, Choben dem ken geschmacklich. He says, cars don't turn me on. I'm sorry. Maybe diamonds, but not cars. Doesn't work for me. No, come on. Oh my God. Yeah. So it doesn't mean anything to me, Pashat. It's not the pshat leib sich nicht. Mir interessiert nicht die ganze Meise. It doesn't mean anything. There's a story with the Rebbetzin, which is an interesting story. I mean, the Rebbetzin, we have to cherish her. But they lived in Paris. And they lived in a studio apartment. The Rebbe and the Rebbetzin had a studio. Studio means it didn't even have a bedroom. It's a tiny little place. In the same room where the Rebbetzin was sleeping, the Rebbe was sitting Yom V'Layla and learning. There was nothing. And this Yid Heber, Leibish Heber, who be'emes has a moidendike schus. It's not the fact he was a Rebbe's friend. He realized that the Rebbe is Mura Meyam. He had a business. Anytime the Rebbe needed him, he closed his business, kipshutei, middle of the day, doesn't matter what day of the week, and went with his car and helped the Rebbe. In other words, he realized that the biggest, Eved Melech Melech, the Rebbe was not the Rebbe at the time. And the Rebbe was a regular nice guy, he was very, very einfach, very, very modest and so forth. But he would stop whatever he was doing. Whatever he was doing, he would stop. Tell him Rebbe Mateva. It was a good friend. He loved the Rebbe, he respected the Rebbe. The Rebbe was a son, kvate by one of his sons and so forth. His son who lives in Crown Heights, the Rebbe was a kvate. So afterwards they told the Rebbe it's not dank. So the Rebbe said, a good friend darf man nicht danken. Good friends don't need to be thanked. So he came to the Rebbe and said, how could you live like this? Is that the Rebbe's kinder? You need a couple of rooms, some space. But the Rebbe had a house full of books. So what do you think he put there? They would push it piled on the tables. And they lived in one little room. And the Rebbetzin always made everything look beautiful. Somebody told me recently that the Rebbetzin said that no matter where they were, even when they were living in Marseille and in, what's the other place called? In Nice, they were living out of suitcases, but she arranged the suitcases should look beautiful. They should be balabata. She should never feel like you don't have a life. In other words, whatever challenge she had, she wanted to be as good as it could be. It should be balabata, it should be nice. It should be yoifi, shane. So he comes to her and says, you can't live like this. And you need an apartment, you need a couple of rooms, you need some furniture, episvos. And he wasn't the kind of guy who talked a lot. He went and he rented an apartment and furnished it. It cost him money. But pashtas. And the Rebbe tells him, I'll discuss it with my husband. Now, the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin were never in-your-face kind of people. They never ever were very, very direct, always very, very fine in the way they dealt with issues. So the Rebbetzin refuses, doesn't bring it up. A day passes, 2 days pass, a week passes. And he saw the Rebbetzin every day. And the Rebbetzin gemacht nicht wissendig, she forgot about it. And the Rebbetzin was not that kind of a person. The Rebbetzin was a responsible woman, and she was certainly straightforward. And here she's avoiding a subject. So finally, after a week, he says to her, "Was ist mitten dir? What about the apartment?" Which she already rented to the Bein Shalom. So she shrugs her shoulder and says, der Mann ist ganz nicht interessiert. My husband is not at all interested, but you have to hear the music, the truck. It wasn't the pseskafia. If it takes 15 minutes to move, I could learn Torah in 15 minutes. What's 15 minutes to have an apartment with some privacy and some space and so on and so forth? A guest room, for heaven's sakes. There's no place to move in that theater. And the response was, this is the pshat precious. It's not I'm doing something, I'm working on myself not to allow myself. It means nothing to me. It's a prerequisite seichel yun. If you want to be a real intellectual, you can't be a grab yung. Now this may come as a surprise to many, because in our culture, that's not what we hear. We hear exactly the opposite. Because in our culture, definition of seichel is only seichel that you can measure with a physical machine. People don't respect real seichel because they don't respect precious. They don't respect refinement and sensitization. Edel is a chesarim. Shame is a midara in our culture. Refinement is viewed as a flaw, as a negative thing. So naturally, real seichel, which has to do with the real persons, are nobody's. Modna b'shefanish. The Gemara says about Hayom Yom. His name came up the other day in one of the classes. I mentioned Hayom Yom. Hayom Yom started for 70 years. And they stayed in the Gemara. And when he woke up, he went into the Beis Medrash. And he's sitting in the back of the room and he's listening to Talmidei Chachamim talk. And he's very, very depressed. Because there are a bunch of Maratzim. Tanoim. In the Tkuf of the Zugis, before Hillel and Shammai. Hayom Yom lived in the middle of Ader Shani. And Hayom Yom was disgusted by their Chochmah. You understand? Was Hayom Yom gewesen? How much? It's only 70 years. It's 2.5 generations, 3 generations. Sachakal. And they're talking and they're talking and they're talking and they're talking, and he just has no way to get involved in the conversation. There's no place for him to get in there because they're like playing with blocks. Until finally someone says a statement, and another guy says, "That's ridiculous. How can you say such a thing?" He says, "What do you mean? I heard it in the name of Chayni Amagal." So he gets up and says, "Excuse me, Chayni Amagal never said that." They turn around. You imagine how the Chayni Amagal looked after sleeping for 70 years. He probably had langahar, tabard, he didn't look exactly like a Reisarov. He certainly didn't have a nice streimel, whatever the case is. They turn around and take a look at him and lachen. And they say to him, "Yeah, how do you know that Chayni Amagal didn't say it?" Look at that, "No, Chayni. Ich bin Chayni Amagal." Hatten sich zerlachen bis Medrisch. They cracked up. Who was this simpleton, this fool, who made an announcement? It's Chayni Amagal, mit gelacht. So the Gemara Chayni Amagal gedavent that he should die. Im loy chavrusa misus, I said in the Gemara. If I have no chaverim, I have no companions, nobody that I can talk to, I want to die. And he died. And it was only after he died that they understood from the things he said that in fact it was Chayni Amagal. And it was too late. And they said in the Gemara. No, you're talking now about Tanoim. And nobody's going to debate that the Tanoim in that base Medrash were Prushim. But the Ein Arech between the Chochmah that comes from the Precious of a Taneh, the Shomas Ve'el Mabriya, that lived in this date, is so far removed from the Chochmah and the Precious, because you cannot separate. Matanya just lived 70 years before, that they look at his Chochmah like tipshus. Not they don't understand him, they don't understand that there's something to understand. Sometimes people say things, you don't understand what they're saying, but you know they're smart. Sometimes the person, I tell you that if Hillel and Shammai walked in the 770, the Bochum would make fun of them. I promise you. If Hillel and Shammai walked in the Medrash and sat down with the Mishnah and the Gemara and started to learn with the boys in the yeshiva, it says in the Gemara, they maratzim, fools. Because the Chochmah is so deep that you wouldn't even understand that it's Chochmah. Not you wouldn't understand what they're saying, you wouldn't understand that there's something to understand. And this is predicated on the connection between Perishus and Seichel. The idea that Perishus means removal from the material world is built into how a person's reasons, because the reason of a person and the integrity of the person are inseparable. So therefore he says, Aleph Yigiyaz Basa, you have to deal with your goof. And that is Lahasara Tuftam Yanil, to remove Yishmak from pleasure. We had earlier Hayom Yom. It was quite recent. Not quite recent for us, could have been 3 months ago. But what we had earlier Hayom Yom, where Rabbi Shmuel Munkus was quoted. And Rabbi Shmuel Munkus said, I'm looking for it as I talk. Rabbi Shmuel Munkus said that when you went to the Alter Rebbe to Yechidus, the ersten Yechidus hat man verloren a Geschmack. Oh, here it is. Not Shmuel Munkus. It's Chazayin Shvat. Chasidim Akedim also Heskem Benafsham. Earlier Chasidim made a resolution. Shekal Davar Amuter. Anything permitted. But you desire it in any way. You won't do it. It broke their taiva. They understood that it's not enough not to indulge. It's necessary not to desire. Because that's what makes you an edel person. And the way you achieve not desiring is never allowing yourself. So the first point is, you want to be a real chacham, you can't be a grab yung. You can't even have the tendencies of a grab yung. You have to become a refined person. And Beis, reading number 2, says you get nefesh. You have to work with the soul. And that is, you have to enjoy ideas. You have to have a gishmak and seichel. You have to push it to enjoy concepts. You have to enjoy analyzing and reasoning. And you know what else? Not arguing. As much as arguing is a part of seichel, a good argument is a very healthy thing, and a bad argument is a very destructive thing. And the difference between a good and a bad argument is very simple. If you have a position on an issue, and you have not thought it through till its very, very, very end, you should never argue, because you'll confuse yourself. You'll never be able to see it through because your ego is involved. You have to, in Chassidus it's called hakova. You have to have patience, deliberation, pause, stel sich up, stop. The translation of the word atzeres, shmini atzeres. One of the translations where it tells upstanders, just stop, just to sit on an idea. Real Baalei Seichel were never in a rush. If you ever read the real Baalei Seichel, they drive you nuts with their patience. They're so slow. They think and they take their time. They're never in a rush. Old people, they slow down. Old people that they slow down. The Blutstulzachheit, they become deeper people. It's not just that they become slower. It's a tiefer sort mensch. Haste is a terrible, terrible deficiency, a terrible chesaron when it comes to any kind of integrity, including integrity in seichel. So you have to desire ideas. And you have to not care whether you're right or you're wrong, whether you're liked or you're disliked, whether your ideas are approved of or disapproved. You have to pursue reason for reason alone. And that's why the modern concept of publishing, every professor has to publish, it's very, very important. But at the same time, it takes away the possibility of really looking for the truth, because you're constantly under pressure to produce. And when you're looking for the truth, you can't produce. Either you'll get the truth or you won't get the truth. But you can't you can't squeeze emes. It either is or it isn't. But in any case, these are hagdomas. This is not yet seichel anushi, seichel uyuni. These are the prerequisites. You want to be a real intellectual. It means to analyze and to delve into real seichel, which means studying and feeling things you cannot see and touch and taste and smell and prove. The hagdomas are yegias basar, not to not allow yourself an indulgence, but to kill the tendency towards desire. And yegias nefesh la'era tuftama.